Shalom, welcome back. I want to take a moment today to speak about the Ebionites. So, several weeks ago, I did a presentation on baptism, and in the process of that presentation, I mentioned that the earliest Christians, the Jerusalem assembly under James, and the apostles, were who they were known as a group, as an assembly, as the Ebionites, that they were vegetarian. And there's a little bit of pushback, about the video on the fish not being originally part of the story, the feeding of the multitude, and I thought maybe it'd be a good time to just discuss again the doctrines of the Ebionites, because I haven't really talked about it in a while, and I know I've mentioned it in several videos that I was probably going to do this. So because I haven't discussed it in a while, I guess it's something that the newer people haven't seen. Maybe the people that have been around for a while are not as familiar with, because I used to talk about it quite a bit. So the earliest believers in Yeshua, some sources say Nazarenes, some say Ebionites. I believe that these are two terms for the same people, and that they originally called themselves Nazareans or Nazarenes, which was, of course, comes from Yeshua. He shall be called a Nazarene. And incidentally, I believe that the Nazarenes existed before Yeshua, and that he was part of this sect, and after his lifetime on earth, they just kind of became another name for Christian, Nazarenes. And so like my channel art that you see on my YouTube channel, like this screen right here comes up at the intro to every video that I do with this presentation software. It tells you, right there, I'm an Ebionite. And it's like if you go to someone's YouTube channel and the person identifies as a certain type of religion or belief, you would expect that person to be espousing the doctrines of his sect or his religion or denomination or whatever you want to call it. So like if you went to the YouTube page of a Muslim, and the Muslim was talking about Allah and the stuff they believe, I mean, I wouldn't think people would get offended at that. I mean, the guy's a Muslim, that's what he's going to talk about. If you go to like a Jew's channel and he's talking about his religion and he talks about how they worship Satan, then I mean, I wouldn't imagine you should get upset about that. You know what they worship. If you go to a Catholic person's YouTube channel and they're talking about the Catholic doctrine, and they're talking about how Mary, they venerate Mary and pray to her and stuff like that, you shouldn't really get upset about that, because that's what Catholics do. And I don't understand why you would come to someone's YouTube channel that openly declares himself to be an Ebionite at the beginning of every video, and you're going to get offended because they promote Ebionite doctrines. And that's what seems to be happening. Again, Nazarene, we've already covered that. And Nazarene is like same branch. The name of my YouTube channel, David HaNotzeri. Notzeri is Hebrew for Nazarene. It means branch. So, when Yeshua says we are the branches, I mean, that's Nazarenes, Netzers. Notzeri is the branch. So it's not my last name. Like David HaNotzeri, it means David the Nazarene. It's that's what I named my YouTube channel years ago, and it's just I've kind of stuck with it. It's what the channel art says. It's what I go by. A scene. So Yeshua in the Gospels, when he was in Jerusalem, he tended to hang out in the Essene quarter. And we know historically that between the time of his death, burial, and resurrection and the time that Jerusalem was destroyed, this Essene quarter became known as the Christian quarter. And even after Jerusalem was destroyed and then it was reestablished later, this same area was still considered the Christian quarter. So Josephus talks about these three different philosophies of the Judeans. And so there's the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which we know about from the New Testament, but he said the third group were the Essenes, and they were Judeans by birth, which tells me that the actual Hebrews, the ones that were descended from the Hebrews, identified themselves as Essenes in the first century. So Yeshua would have been an Essene. He would have been of the sect, from what my understanding is, of the sect of the Nazarenes, or the Nazarenes. And the Nazarenes actually existed before the coming of Yeshua. I don't know when they were established, but I knew they existed before the coming of Yeshua because Epiphanius mentions it in the Panarion. He says the Nazarenes existed before Yeshua, before Messiah. And after Yeshua came, of course, he was associated with the Nazarenes. It even says in the New Testament, he shall be a Nazarene. And Nazarene being a sect of Essene. So, over time, after Yeshua's ascension into heaven, and the Nazarenes were called Ebionites. Ebion means poor, and it was probably a derogatory term. So they called themselves Nazarenes, but others who wanted to degrade them would call them Ebionites, and eventually the name kind of stuck. The same thing happened with the term Christian. Christian was what they were calling believers in Yeshua as a derogatory title, and eventually it just got adopted by the early believers, and that's where the title Christian comes from. It was originally a derogatory title. The same thing with the term Jew. Like, the Jews did not name themselves Jews, the Christians did. The Christians were calling them Jews all through the Middle Ages because that's what the New Testament called them, and eventually they just started calling themselves Jews. So that's the way that sometimes these derogatory type of titles end up being adopted by the people that they're being used to refer to. So, it's really just kind of a long way of saying that I think that the Ebionite, Nazarene, and Essene should really almost kind of mean the same thing. Three different names that basically are referring to the same people. In fact, there's letters going back and forth between early church theologians, and they use the terms interchangeably, at least with regards to Ebionites and Nazarenes. So, to me it sounds like they are the same group of people. Now, today we're going to be looking at Epiphanius and his book, the Panarion. Panarion means medicine chest. So, the Panarion is a heresiology. It is a document that was... A lot of heresiologies were put out in the early church, and what it was, it documented what the author was calling heresies, and the author would tell you why they are heresies and condemn all these different groups that they disagreed with. Epiphanius was a Catholic bishop. He lived in Palestine in the 4th century. So he was there. He knew Ebionites. He talked to them. He interviewed them. He in his book, The Panarion, when he's talking about the Ebionites, he says that he asked them this question and they responded and said this. He does, as I mentioned in the video about the Gospel according to the Hebrews, he's playing a little bit of a shell game with these titles, and he makes it sound like the Nazarenes, the Nazarenes, the Ebionites, that there are all these different groups. But they all believe basically the same things, and he says that they belong to each other's school of thought. And it's kind of difficult to really even tell what the difference is between these groups. And I really believe that he's just confusing the matter. He's playing a shell game. He's trying to disassociate the Ebionites from the Nazarenes. In fact, there's two groups that he describes called the Nazarenes. One group he apparently doesn't actually interact with, because everything he says about them, he's like, they probably do this, they probably do that, I think that they probably think this or that. But he doesn't actually speak about them as if he has talked to them, like he does with the Ebionites. With the Ebionites, there's evidence within his writing that he is communicating with them face to face and knows them in Palestine in the 4th century. So we're going to look at some of these groups. The Panarian is organized by chapter. So each chapter is a different heresy. And before we get into this, I want to make the point. Epiphanius is a hostile witness to all of these groups. He is not going to sing their praises. He is going to take reasonable doctrines, but he's going to make them sound unreasonable. He's going to ridicule them and belittle them and slander them. And I mean, he's going to call them everything, every name he can think of in the book. He's not going to, like, their doctrines are not going to be represented fairly. But when you read the way that he describes these groups, and then you read the sermons of Peter and the Nazarene Acts in the Rock of a Sure Foundation, you can see these doctrines being presented by Peter. Like these different doctrines and understandings are included in the teachings of Peter. But as far as Epiphanius is concerned, everything they believe is wrong. Because Epiphanius is a Catholic bishop, and he is writing this book to keep people from going over and becoming Ebionites or becoming Nazarenes or whatever, and he's trying to give legitimacy to the Catholic Church. And one of the ways he does that is he speaks out of two sides of his mouth. Like, out of one side of his mouth, he admits that the Ebionites and the Nazarenes came out of Pella, which is where the disciples of Yeshua settled after Jerusalem was destroyed. And out the other side of his mouth, he talks about how they're heretics. And it's, he's trying to confuse the matter. If you read between the lines of what he's saying, he's telling you that this is the Jerusalem assembly. This is the earliest believers, the actual disciples of Yeshua, as their descendants. And likewise, it would be Yeshua's doctrines that they hold to, not this apostasy that he's accusing them of. So first, we're going to look in chapter 18, and we're going to look at what he says in Against the Nazarenes. Now, notice the way he spells Nazarenes here, N-A-S-A-R, because he's also going to speak about the Nazarenes that has a different spelling. I think it's the same group. This group with the S, N-A-S, Nazarenes, they're the ones that he admits in his description of them that they existed before the advent of Messiah. By the way, if you want a copy of the Panarian, email me and I will ask for it and I will send it to you. Just email and say, hey, can you send me that copy of the Panarian? And I'll send you the PDF, and it will have my highlights in it. So you can go to these chapters and you can read it for yourself, because I can't include everything in the chapters. They're very long. We would be in a 5-hour long video if I did. But I'm going to hit the high points. So, Against the Nazarenes. And again, every one of these starts off with him saying, against this group, against that group. He is, and I cannot emphasize this enough, he is a hostile witness. So he's going to say things, he's going to paint everything they believe as a heresy, but then when you actually read the words of Peter, speaking about these same doctrines, then you're like, oh, well, that's not like the way that Epiphanius makes it sound. This is actually a reasonable doctrine. But Epiphanius makes everything sound like it's outrageous. So he says, next I shall undertake to describe the sect after the Hermobaptist. Hermobaptist is someone who baptizes daily. Called the sect of the Nazarenes. They are Jews by nationality from Galantius, Bashantis, and Transjordan, as I have been told, but descendants of Israel himself. This sect practices Judaism in all respects and has scarcely any beliefs beyond the ones that I have mentioned. It, too, had been given circumcision, and it kept the same Sabbath and observed the same festivals, and certainly did not include fate or astrology. It also recognized as fathers the persons in the Pentateuch, from Adam to Moses, who were illustrious for the excellence of their piety. I mean, Adam, Seth, Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, Aaron, Moses, and Joshua, the son of Nun. However, it would not accept the Pentateuch itself. It acknowledged Moses and believed that he had received legislation, but not this legislation, though, they said, but some other. And so, though they were Jews who kept the Jewish observances, they would not offer sacrifice or eat meat. In their eyes, it was unlawful to eat meat or make sacrifices with it. They claimed that these books are forgeries and that none of these customs were instituted by the fathers. This was the difference between the Nazarenes and other groups, and their refutation is to be seen not in one place but in many. So, this is the basic description he gives us of the Nazarenes. Peter, in the Nazarene Acts, he says that over time people had added stuff to the law of Moses, and so now there's a mixture of truth and falsehood. Specifically, sacrifices were something that was added. Even in the Old Testament prophets speak against sacrifices. Isaiah speaks against sacrifices. Jeremiah does. It's all through the prophets in the Old Testament, them speaking against sacrifices. They deny that he ever ordained sacrifices. And by the way, if I made a couple of videos, the names of the videos are I Came to Abolish Sacrifices Part 1 and Part 2. If you think that the prophets did not speak against sacrifices in the Old Testament, go watch those two videos, I Came to Abolish Sacrifices Parts 1 and 2. They go into detail about it. They show you the text, and you can pause the videos and look it up in the Bible yourself and confirm that what I'm telling is true. The prophets in the Old Testament condemned the practice of sacrifices. So, what Epiphanius is using here to describe the Nazarenes is the way Peter is teaching in the Nazarene Acts and in the sermons of Peter. And also it lines up with things that the prophets said in the Tanakh. So, that is the Nazarenes. He doesn't say a whole lot about many of these groups. Now, when he gets to the Ebionites, he gives you a whole lot of information. Notice, though, here in verse 3, where it says, not this legislation, though, they said, but some other. This is what I'm saying. Like, Epiphanius will make statements like that, and that tells you that he is talking to someone, because he's saying they said it. They said this. So he is interviewing Nazarenes while he's in Palestine. And he's telling you what they said to him. When he gets to the Nazarenes with a Z, in a Z, he doesn't make statements like that. And many of these scholarly academic people who study these books, they say it's apparent that Epiphanius didn't actually know any of those Nazarenes, the Nazarenes with a Z, because he doesn't mention anything about them. He speculates about them. He says, I think that they do this, I think that their books say this or that, but he's not speaking from being a first-hand witness, is the gist of that. The next chapter, chapter 19, is against the Osseans. Now, ose in Hebrew means do. So Osseans are the doers. Remember, you know, James talks about being doers, and Paul even mentions that at one point. So the Osseans are doers. Now, Epiphanius says Osseans means sturdy people. I don't know where he gets that from, but I do know that ose means to do in Hebrew. After this sect, in turn, comes another one which is closely connected with them. So after the Nazarenes, here comes another sect which is closely connected. Okay, so he's telling you right off the bat that the Nazarenes and the Osseans are closely connected to each other. This one is called the sect of the Osseans. These are Jews like the others, hypocritical in their behavior and horrid in their way of thinking. I have been told that they originally came from Nabatea, Uratia, Moabitis, and Aurelius, the lands beyond the basin of what sacred scriptures calls the Salt Sea. This is the one which is called the Dead Sea, and from the translation of the name, this people of the Osseans means sturdy people. So this area that they're coming from, past the Salt Sea, that's the area around Pella where the Jerusalem assembly fled right before Jerusalem was destroyed. So again, he's telling you that they sprang up in the same area that the disciples of Yeshua migrated to. He goes on to say, and notice the craziness of the fraud. Okay, so let me tell you who the he is. So you notice here it says he bans burnt offerings. The he that he is referring to is a person named El-Chai, who was probably not even a person at all. So the early Jewish Christians, they used a book called the Book of El-Chai, which was used by Jewish Christian sects in Palestine. And the book was rumored to have fallen from heaven. El-Chai means the God of life. So it would have been called the Book of the God of Life, the Book of El-Chai. But Epiphanius seems to think that El-Chai is a person. And most of the, if you read academics that talk about Epiphanius and his Panarian, a lot of them believe that he is mistaken, that El-Chai was not a person, that maybe Epiphanius had a copy of the Book of El-Chai and thought, oh, this is written by a guy named El-Chai, but in reality it was the Book of the God of Life, which is why he's referring to this as a person. But instead of understanding he bans burnt offerings, you should understand that he's talking about the sect. He's talking about the Osseans. The Osseans don't do burnt offerings because he says this book of El-Chai says not to, is what it comes down to. And notice the craziness of the fraud. He bans burnt offerings and sacrifices as something foreign to God and never offered to him on the authority of the fathers and law. And yet he says we must pray toward Jerusalem, where the altar and the sacrifices were, but rejects the Jewish custom of eating meat and the rest, and the altar and fire as something foreign to God. And again, what he's saying here, this lines up with what the Old Testament prophets say. And Epiphanius is making out like it's this crazy, off the, whatever belief that these Osseans have. The point is, here's your doctrinal evidence that says that they didn't make sacrifices. And it says rejects the Jewish custom of eating meat. So again, when I say the first Christians, the Jewish Christians did not eat meat, here's your evidence. Ask me for a copy of the Panarian. You can look it up yourself and read it. And you can tell me, am I lying to you? Because I'm not. I copied this straight out of the book. And he says, this then is the sect of those Osseans, which lives the Jewish life in Sabbath observance, circumcision, and the keeping of the whole law, Only by renouncing the books of Moses does it cause a schism, as the Nazarenes do, since it differs from the other 6 of these 7 sects. Notice now he calls these Osseans Essenes, which is very close to Essenes. And we'll see that again come up again, that there's these sects that he names that sounds very similar to Essenes. And I think that this again comes back to what I was saying earlier about before they were called Nazarenes, they were the Essenes. It was the Essene quarter, was where the faith in Yeshua took root in Jerusalem. And Josephus said that the ones that were Jews by birth were known as Essenes. And it's not very far away phonetically from Essene or Osene. And I shall pass this sect by as well, for again, El Chai is associated with the Ebionites after Christ, as well as the Nazarenes. See, he's telling you all these groups are closely related. And again, I think they're the same group who came later. And 4 sects have made use of him because they were bewitched by his imposture. Of these that came after him, the Ebionites and the Nazarenes, of those before his time, and during it, the Osseans and the Nazarenes, whom I mentioned earlier. So, again, here's the 4 groups, right? Ebionites, Nazarenes, Osseans, Nazarenes. I mean, the names are similar. Their names are used interchangeably by other church theologians, and I think they're the same group of people. It's just different names for the same group, but Epiphanius is playing this game where he's trying to confuse the issue, the shell game. Remember from the video I did on the part 1 of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, the shell game that Epiphanius plays. So next we come up to the Nazarenes, and again, see, in green was what we saw earlier, Nazarenes with an S, but he's saying Nazarenes with a Z. So he's trying to make the case that these are 2 different groups. He says that the Nazarenes with an S were before Christ, and after Yeshua, then there was a sect of the Nazarenes with a Z, but he also tries to tell you they're not the same group. But that doesn't make sense. It makes a whole lot more sense to understand it's the same group of people, and they just, like the sect existed before Yeshua came. And after Yeshua came, because he was part of their sect, they all followed Yeshua, and they became just thought of as Christians. One thing that comes up consistently in his description of these Nazarenes in chapter 29 is that he doesn't actually know any of them. He doesn't mention that they tell him stuff like he does with the other sects. Next after these come the Nazarenes, at the same time as they, even before them, either together or with them or after them. In any case, they're contemporaries. I cannot say more precisely who succeeded whom, for as I said, these were contemporary with each other and had ideas similar to each other's. So he's telling you right now he's got these groups confused. He doesn't understand exactly what the differences are. The shell game. You can't, because he's a hostile witness, you shouldn't take everything he says at face value. Read him with a grain of salt, read between the lines, and you'll figure out what the case really is. He says, for these people did not give themselves the name of Christ or Jesus' own name, but that of Nazarenes. But at that time, all Christians alike were called Nazarenes, and they came to be called Jesseans for a short while, which again, okay, so Jesseans, that would have been, it's trying to relate it to Jesus, right? But Jesus' name wouldn't have been pronounced Jesus in Greek. It would have been Jesus. So it would have been Yesseans. Or again, Yesseans, Esseans, Essenes. I mean, you can see the similar phoneticism. They were called Yesseans for a short while, before the disciples began to be called Christians at Antioch, but they were called Yesayans because of Jesse, I suppose, since David was descended from Jesse and Mary was a lineal descendant of David. This was in fulfillment of sacred scripture, since the Old Testament, the Lord tells David, of the fruit of thy belly I shall set upon thy throne. I think what he means here, I think he's referring to a tradition he heard that the Christians were called Essenes, and he's just getting the details mixed up and trying to relate that to Jesse. But there's no way to prove, one way or another. But that's what I think after my own research and studying this stuff out. I think he is saying that before they were known as Nazarenes, they were known as Essenes. But these same sectarians whom I am discussing here disregarded the name of Jesus and neither called themselves Yesayans, kept the name of Jews, nor termed themselves Christians, but Nazarenes, supposedly from the name of the place Nazareth, but they are Jews in every way and nothing else. They use not only the New Testament, but the Old Testament as well, as the Jews do, for they do not repudiate the legislation, the prophets, and the books which are called the writings by the Jews and by themselves. They have no different views, but confess everything in full accord with the doctrine of the law, and are like the Jews, except that they are supposedly believers in Christ, for they acknowledge both the resurrection of the dead and that all things have been created by God, and they declare that God is one, and that his Son is Jesus Christ. They are particularly versed in the Hebrew language. For the entire law, the prophets, and the so-called writings, the poetic books, Kings, Chronicles, Esther, and the rest, are read in Hebrew among them, as of course they are among the Jews. They are different from Jews and different from Christians only in the following ways. They disagree with the Jews because of their belief in Christ, but they are not in accord with Christians because they are still fettered by the law, circumcision, the Sabbath, and the rest. As to Christ, I cannot say whether they too are misled by the wickedness of Cerinthius and Marinthius and regard him as a mere man, or whether, as the truth is, they affirm that he was born of Mary by the Holy Spirit. Okay, so what he's saying in that verse 6, notice he can't say one way or another. The reason he can't say is because he doesn't actually know any of these people. And I think he's just making up this group to try and make a separate group from the Ebionites, the shell game. But the Nazarenes, the Ebionites, the Cerinthians, the Osseans, they all believed that Yeshua was the physical son of Joseph. Now, you'll see that Catholic bishops will misrepresent this belief and say they believed he was a mere man. None of these groups believed he was just a mere man. That is like propaganda to turn you against these groups, and people still do it today. In fact, just recently I was listening to a presentation that Doug at Jesus Words Only had done, where he was talking about the way that the virgin birth was added to Scripture, and he said, "Look, these Catholic bishops, you'll see them in these ancient texts saying that, this group just believed he was a mere man." And he said, no, that's not no one believes he's a mere man, but just that he was the son of Joseph. And Doug makes a good point about that. If Yeshua was not the son of Joseph, why is Joseph's genealogy in the beginning of Matthew? And then in the Syriac Gospels from the year 340, it actually says in there that Joseph begot Jesus. So the virgin birth was added later. It was not part of the Gospel of Matthew to begin with. It's a Catholic doctrine that they changed the text to fit their doctrine. But that doesn't mean that the Ebionites believed that Yeshua was a mere man. You look at the Doctrines of the Nazarenes that is in the Nazarene Acts, in the mouth of Peter. Peter is nowhere describes Yeshua as a mere man. He says that Yeshua pre-existed before his actual birth, He was the very first. He was the firstborn of creation, which means that he was created before anything else, and through him everything else was created. That does not sound like a mere man. And the thing is like, Doug was given that discussion on the virgin birth being added, and he was saying no one believes that Yeshua is a mere man. No one's saying that. That's just misrepresenting what we're talking about. I'm just saying he wasn't born of a virgin. And that's the way I am too. I don't believe he was born of a virgin because the evidence doesn't prove that. The only evidence is what's in the New Testament, and we know that that was added later. But then somebody sends me an email the other day saying, check out this teaching by Doug. He's saying Yeshua is a mere man. And I watched the presentation, and he nowhere says he's a mere man, nothing but a man. Just a mere man, nothing else. He doesn't say that. He never said it. See, it's this false accusation, and it comes from people who follow stuff like what Epiphanius is saying. It's slander. It's falsehood. It's lying. If someone says, hey, I don't believe in the virgin birth, but I believe that Yeshua was, the firstborn of all creation, and through him everything was created, and he's Messiah, and he's going to be our king, and he's ruling and reigning in heaven. Like, you don't believe he's a mere man. No one, like, mere men do not do that. And if you're misrepresenting what someone said and claiming that they said that Yeshua is a mere man when they didn't say it, you are a liar. Stop lying about what people say. Epiphanius is a liar. He is lying about what these people believed. He's sitting here denigrating the descendants of the original disciples and lying about them, saying that they believe Yeshua was a mere man. And then he goes on later to say that they believe that Yeshua's he's like one of the archangels, but he's above the archangels, and he's like 96 miles tall when he's in his angelic form. And it's like, really? So you just got finished saying that they believe he is a mere man. And then you're going to say that they believe this, that he's 96. Have you met a mere man who's 96 miles tall? Have you met a mere man that is higher than the archangels and created before God created anything else? Epiphanius is lying. He's lying in this passage by saying that they believe he's a mere man. The person that wrote to me and said that Doug believes that Jesus is a mere man is a liar. Doug did not say that. He said the opposite. He says, no one believes he's a mere man. I don't believe he's a mere man. And this guy sends me a freaking email saying that Doug believes that Jesus is a mere man. He does not. The Ebionites didn't believe he's a mere man. The Nazarenes didn't believe he's a mere man. They just didn't believe he was born of a virgin. Because these Catholic priests, they get their mind wrapped around the flesh of Jesus. And they think that the flesh is all that makes up Yeshua. It's like Yeshua in John chapter 3. If you don't understand earthly things, how can I teach you heavenly things? Like being wrapped around the axle over Yeshua's flesh, the flesh that he was wearing during his time on earth, that's an earthly thought. That's earthly things. The spiritual being that occupied that flesh, that is the Messiah. That is the Christ. And that's not a mere man. It pre-existed that flesh that he wore during his earthly ministry. And that's the heavenly things. Like, these people get so wrapped around the axle over the virgin birth, the flesh doesn't matter. You're thinking that all that matters is the flesh, and that Yeshua didn't even exist before he was born to Mary. That's not true. And so anyone who says that, now like at Yeshua's baptism this day I have begotten you, and they think, oh, that's adoptionism. No, it's not adoptionism. He didn't say adoption. He said begotten. I've begotten you. If you beget someone, you're not adopting them. Sorry, I'll end my rant here. It's like I want to go through this and teach you guys this stuff, but at the same time, I really do not enjoy reading the words of a liar. Like I get kind of upset with people who lie about things. And so while Epiphanius has some very valuable information, so that we can use his information to reconstruct what the Ebionites believed. And he is a witness, even though he's a questionable, hostile witness. Man, sometimes it's just hard to read what he says, because it just, it's infuriating in a way. He goes on to say this sect of Nazarenes is to be found in Berea near Cloas, Syria, in the Decapolis near Pella. Okay, so Pella, that's where the disciples fled to before the destruction of Jerusalem. So see, he's telling you that they originated in the same area where the disciples fled to. And in Bashantis, in a place called Kokeba in Hebrew, for that was his place of origin, since all the disciples had settled in Pella after their removed from Jerusalem, Christ having told them to abandon Jerusalem and withdraw from it because of the siege it was about to undergo. And they settled in Perea for this reason, and as I said, lived their lives there. It was from this that the Nazarene sect had its origin. They have the gospel according to Matthew in its entirety in Hebrew, for it is clear that they still preserve this as it was originally written in the Hebrew alphabet, but I do not know whether they have also exercised the genealogies from Abraham till Christ. So see, he doesn't have first-hand knowledge of this sect. But now that we have also detected this sect like a stinging insect that is small and yet causes pain with this poison, and have squashed it with the words of the truth, let us go on to the next, beloved, praying for help from God. By the way, his squashing it with the words of truth was him going through several rants of just how awful these people were. I wouldn't say that he brought forth any truth to squash them. He just slandered them a lot. And of course, I'm not reading everything he says. Like I said earlier, it's just, several pages of stuff. I'm just trying to hit the high points. The actual data that we could possibly use. Most of what he writes about these sects is just him ranting about how awful and terrible they are. So now we get to the Ebionites. Now the Ebionites, he spends more time discussing the Ebionites than any other sect in the Panarian. And this information is very similar to what he said about the Nazarenes and the Osseans and the Cerinthians and all these other sects, some of which I didn't cover in this video. It's just too much information. Like I said, if you want the information, email me. I'll send you the entire Panarian, and you can go through and read it. You don't even have to read the whole thing. You could just, look up the various sects in the table of contents and turn to those chapters and, just read those chapters. But when he gets to the Ebionites, he says, following these and holding views like theirs, Ebion, the founder of the Ebionites, arose in the world in his turn as a monstrosity with many forms, and practically represented in himself the snake-like form of the mythical many-headed Hydra. He was of the Nazarenes school, but preached and taught other things than they. For he has the Samaritans' unpleasantness, but the Jews' name, the opinion of the Osseans, Nazarenes, the form of Cerinthians, and the perversity of the Carpocratians. So again, Epiphanius himself is telling you that these groups all pretty much believe the same thing. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I really think he's telling you that they were the same group. I mean, it might have been like individual congregations that went by different names or something, but they're essentially the same group. The shell game. Once again, he's continuing to play it with these Jewish Christian groups. For this Ebion was a contemporary with the Jews, since he was with them, he was derived from them. So here you see him playing the same game as he did with El Chai. El Chai was just the name of a book. And he tried to act like it was a person who founded the sect of the Nazarenes or Osseans or whatever it was. Now he's saying that Ebion was a person, but no one else thinks that Ebion was a person. Ebion just means poor. The name of the sect was the Ebionites because they were the poor. That was a title they were given by others who, as a derogatory term. Like, you read anyone like these guys like Bart Ehrman and James Tabor and people who study this, academics that study this, None of them believe that Ebion was a person. They all say that, this is Epiphanius was mistaken. He thought that Ebion was the name of a person, but it's just the name of the sect. It just means poor. So when you read this, where he says he, just understand it to mean them, like the sect itself. In the first place, he said that Christ was conceived by sexual intercourse, and that the seed of a man, Joseph, in other words, he was just a natural born. He was born through natural means, which is what the Ebionites believed. It's what the Nazarenes believed. Look, they had James as the head of their church, and after James, it was his cousin Simon Bar Cloppa, and 16 other bishops, 18 in total, that were bishops over the Ebionites, that were the family of Yeshua. If anyone would know whether Yeshua was born of a virgin, I think James would know. Alright, so where were we at? His adherence to Judaism, law of the Sabbath, circumcision, and all other Jewish and Samaritan observances. But like the Samaritans, he goes still further than that every day. If a man has been with a woman and left her, he must immerse himself in water, any water he can find, by sea or other. Moreover, if he should meet someone while returning from his immersion and bathe in the water, he runs back again for another immersion, often even with his clothes on. Okay, so the statement about doing an immersion or a baptism after intercourse, this is something that Peter mentions in the Nazarene Acts. It's not a crazy like take a shower after that, after intercourse, take a shower. Who doesn't do that? Like that, like as if that is some like controversial thing. Like, hey, after having relations, get a shower. I mean, everyone does that. But according to Epiphanius, it's it's a horrible thing to do. I guess I don't know. I sincerely doubt that an Ebionite would run back to the water after just meeting someone on the way back from bathing. That just sounds like just pure made up slander. This sect now forbids celibacy and continence altogether, as do the other sects which are like it. For at one time they prided themselves on virginity, presumably because of James, the Lord's brother, and so addressed their treatises to elders and virgins. So, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Essene text, they do promote virginity in them. But the thing is, or not virginity, but just abstinence. But the thing is, if you're not having kids, then it's kind of hard to keep your sect going. So that might be what Epiphanius is referring to. Back when it was an Essene sect, they didn't, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they talk about not living with wives and stuff. So maybe that is true. Their origin came after the fall of Jerusalem, since practically all who came to faith in Christ had settled in Perea, then in Pella, a town in the Decapolis, the Gospel mentions, which is near Batanea and Bashantis. As they moved there and were living there, this provided an opportunity for Ebion. So, once again, he's saying that this sect is descended from the original disciples of Yeshua. They too accept the gospel according to Matthew, like the Cerinthians and Marinthians. They too use it alone. They call it according to the Hebrews. And it is true to say that only Matthew expounded and preached the gospel in the Hebrew language and the alphabet in the New Testament. But some may already have replied that the Gospel of John 2, translated from Greek to Hebrews in the Jewish treasuries, the treasuries at Tiberias, and is stored there secretly, as certain Jewish converts have described to me in detail. And not only that, but it is said that the book of Acts of the Apostles, also translated from Greek to Hebrew, is there in the treasuries, so that the Jews who have read it, the ones who told me about it, have been converted to Christ from this. But they use certain other books as well, supposedly the so-called Travels of Peter, written by Clement, though they corrupt their contents while leaving a few genuine passages. So I think the Travels of Peter here may be referring to the same information that's in the Sermons of Peter and or the Nazarene Acts. In the Travels, they changed everything to suit themselves, and they slander Peter in many ways. Get this is how horribly they slander Peter, saying that he was baptized daily for purification as they are. Oh, they say that Peter takes a bath every day. Whoa, what slander, what slander, oh my goodness. And they say he abstained from the flesh and dressed meat, as they do, and any other dish made from meat, since both Ebion himself and Ebionites entirely abstain from these. They too receive baptism apart from their daily baptisms, and they celebrate supposed mysteries from year to year in imitation of the sacred mysteries of the church, using unleavened bread, and the other part of the mystery with water only. Okay, so so first of all, they slander Peter by saying he bathes every day. And you can read that in the Nazarene Acts, in the Sermons of Peter, in that book I've distributed, the Rock of a Sure Foundation. If you don't have it yet, there will be links and descriptions of this video. They also say that he abstained from flesh, as they do. So again, here it is telling you the Ebionites did not eat meat. This is not something that I'm mistaken about, or that I'm projecting my own beliefs on them or anything like that, like I've been accused of. Here's the evidence. Here's the proof. If you want to actually read the text, email me. I'll send you the Panarian. Just email me and ask for it. Like right here it tells you. I don't know how much more clear it can tell you. They did not eat meat. Oh, and also at the bottom in 16:1, I've mentioned before in previous videos that the Ebionites did baptism as an initiation into the faith, but then afterwards they continued doing daily baptisms or whatever, and that's what he's referring to here in 16:1. They too received baptism, and this is part as the initiation. They received baptism apart from their daily baptisms, right? And then the supposed mysteries is speaking about, I think, the Eucharist. So instead of bread and wine, they would do bread and water. Picking up 16:2, but as I said, they set aside by side two who have been appointed by God, one being Christ and one the devil, and they say that Christ has been allotted the world to come, but that this world has been entrusted to the devil, supposedly by the decree of the Almighty, at the request of each of them. And again, that's the law of conjunction from the Nazarene Acts and or the Sermons of Peter, that the devil is the one that's ruling the world right now, and but then you can choose the good prince, and you can go over to follow Christ instead. And Peter talks about that in the Nazarene Acts, and I'm sure we'll get into that a lot more in detail in the days to come as we start delving into that stuff. But then the way Epiphanius presents it here is meant to sound outrageous. And they say that this is why Jesus has begotten of the Son of Man, has begotten of the seed of man, and chosen, and thus has been named Son of God by election after the Christ who came to him from on high in the form of a dove. But they say that he is not begotten of God the Father, but created as one of the archangels, and that he is both ruler of angels and of all creatures, and the Almighty, and he came and instructed us to abolish the sacrifices, as their so-called gospel says, I came to abolish sacrifices, and if you cease not from sacrifice, wrath will not cease from you. Both these and certain things of the kind are godful inventions that are current among them. So, again, on one hand, Epiphanius says that they believe that Jesus was just a man, but then they also believe he was created as one of the archangels. So it's like, obviously, he's like Paul. He can't keep his story straight. He's contradicting himself. They speak of other Acts of the Apostles in which there is much thoroughly impious material, and from them arm themselves against the truth in deadly earnest. They lay down certain assents and instructions in the supposed assents of James, as though he were giving orders against the temple and the sacrifices and the fire and the altar and much else that is full of nonsense. The ascents of James is believed to be what is in Nazarene Acts Book 1, where James and the apostles are going to the temple and arguing with the priests. Nor are they ashamed to accuse Paul. Here with certain fabrications of their false apostles' villainy and imposture, they say that he was a Tarsian, which he himself admits and does not deny, and they suppose that he was of Greek parentage, taking the occasion for this from the same passage because of his frank statement, "I'm a man of Tarsus, a citizen of no mean city." They then claim that he was Greek and the son of a Greek mother and a Greek father, but he had gone up to Jerusalem, stayed there for a while, desired to marry a daughter of the high priest, and had therefore become a proselyte and been circumcised. But since he still could not marry that sort of girl, he became angry and wrote against the circumcision and against the Sabbath and legislation. So, again, the Ebionites were anti-Paul. That's what he's saying. But he, or Ebion, is making a completely false accusation. This horrid serpent, with his poverty of understanding, for Ebion, translated from Hebrew to Greek, means poor. For truly he is poor in understanding and hope in actuality, since he regards Christ as a mere man. Okay, like back and forth. Now he's going back to him being a mere man, and thus has come to hope in him with poverty of faith. They themselves, if you please, boastfully claim that they are poor, because they sold their possessions in the apostles' time and laid them at the apostles' feet and went over to a life of poverty and renunciation, and thus they say they are called poor by everyone. So again, the original Jerusalem assembly, who laid their possessions at the apostles' feet, is now their descendants are being ridiculed here by Epiphanius. And notice it says that they're called poor by everyone. So everyone else is calling them Ebionites. I think they themselves call themselves Nazarenes, at least at first. Later they may have adopted the name Ebionite for themselves, but this is one of the passages that's caused me to come to that understanding that it was not something that they started off calling themselves. But there's no truth to this claim of theirs either. He was really named Ebi, and I suppose the poor wretch was named prophetically by his father and mother. Again, there's no person named Ebion, but whatever. They acknowledge Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, and Joshua the son of Nun, simply as Moses' successor, though he is of no importance. But after these, they acknowledge no more of the prophets, but even anathemized David and Solomon and make fun of them. Similarly, they disregard Isaiah and Jeremiah, Daniel and Ezekiel, Elijah and Elisha, for they paid them no heed and blasphemed their prophecies, but accept only the gospel. And I don't know that that's really the case. It says, they say, however, that Christ is a prophet of truth, and that Christ, the Son of God, by promotion and by union with the elevation on high, which has come to him. They say that the prophets are prophets of their own understanding, not of truth. Christ alone, they would have it, is prophet, man, Son of God, and Christ, and as I have said before, he's a mere man who has come to be called Son of God owing to the virtue of his life, which, again, they did not believe he was only a man. It's ridiculous every time he says that. What he was saying about them disregarding the prophets, you can see what they actually believed in the Nazarene Acts. Peter tells you that the other prophets could not see clearly like the Messiah could. The Messiah could see clearly everything from the beginning to the end, but the prophets could only prophesy like they were looking through like a smoky glass. So they didn't see things as clear. It doesn't mean that they totally disregard their prophecies. It's just that their prophecies are not as sure as the true prophet. And as far as making fun of David and Solomon, I don't know where that comes from. I see no evidence of that in any of the documents we actually have from the Ebionites. Nor do they accept Moses' Pentateuch in its entirety. They reject certain sayings when you say to them of eating meat, why did Abraham serve the angels the calf and the milk? Why did Noah eat meat? And why was he told to by God, who says slay and eat? Why did Isaac and Jacob sacrifice to God and Moses too in the wilderness? He will disbelieve those things and will say, what need for me to read what's in the law when the gospel has come? And then, well, how do you know about Moses and Abraham? I know you admit they exist and that you put them down as righteous and your own ancestors. And then he, the Ebionite, will answer, Christ revealed this to me, and will blaspheme most of the legislation, and Samson, David, Elijah, Samuel, Elisha, and the rest. So Epiphanius is telling you about an interaction he had with one or some of the Ebionites. And he questioned them, saying, well, when you say that you don't eat meat, what about these examples? Abraham serving the angels and Noah eating meat. And the Ebionite will say, well, I don't believe those things. And what need do I have to read that when Messiah has told us the truth? Like, that's what he's saying, where he says, what need for me to read what's in the law when the gospel has come? The Ebionite is saying, well, I believe what Yeshua said. Yeshua revealed this to me, and I believe him. I believe him over these written texts. And Epiphanius, he responds, well, how do you even know about Moses and Abraham if you didn't read the law? And, the Ebionite is trying to explain to him, like, the reason we don't eat meat is because Christ revealed that to me. He revealed that to us. They're following the instructions of Christ. They don't care what the text says. And that's the way I feel. Like, I don't care what the text says. You can point to stuff like that all day long, where Abraham ate meat, or Noah was told to eat lizards, or whatever. It doesn't matter, because Yeshua told his apostles not to eat meat, and Peter passed that information on through his teachings to me. And because I read the text and the Holy Spirit confirmed it, I don't care. I don't care what it says. I'm not going to disobey Yeshua just because of some story in the book of Genesis. I'm not. Like, we need to put our priorities straight. If we believe Yeshua is the Messiah, we should just believe him in everything he says. And if he says not to eat meat, then as far as I'm concerned, that does it. That seals it for me. Okay, Yeshua said not to do it. I'm not going to sit there and drag out the Torah and start going through and asking him, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Obviously, he says, it's like Epiphanius says right there, he will disbelieve it. Yes, an Ebionite will just disbelieve those things because we believe Yeshua above those things. If you got a contradiction between Yeshua and between some other text, like the book of Genesis, you should go with what Yeshua tells you. But next I shall discuss the other false accusations which they make against Peter and the other apostles, that every day before so much as eating bread, Peter took a bath. Man, horrible things they say about Peter. Observe the whole of their slander and the badness hidden under their cheap teaching, since they are defiled themselves and often indulge themselves sexually on earth. They make lavish use of water for their own reassurance, to deceive themselves, if you please, under the impression that they have purification through baptism. I mean, that to me just seems like what Peter was teaching, and Epiphanius just doesn't like it. And again, the Lord himself says, with desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you. And he did not simply say Passover, but this Passover, so that no one could play with it in his sense. A Passover, as I said, was meat roasted with fire and the rest. But to destroy deliberately the true passages, these people have altered its text, which is evident to everyone from the expressions that accompany it, and represented the disciples as saying, where wilt thou that we prepare thee to eat the Passover? And he supposedly said, did I really desire to eat meat as this Passover with you? So that's one of the references we have to the gospel according to the Hebrews, which said that Yeshua didn't want to eat meat at the Passover, which makes sense because the Ebionites believed that he didn't eat meat. And they believed he didn't eat meat because their gospel, the gospel of the Hebrews, said that that's what it was. And that's why we don't have a copy of the gospel of the Hebrews anymore, because it disagreed with what the Catholic Church wanted to teach. Mostly it disagreed with Paul. So that's it. There's more information that he gives about the Ebionites. Those are the high points. If you want to read the whole thing, email me. I'll send you the Panarian, and you can read it for yourself. You can go to chapter 30, read the whole thing. Just keep in mind, Epiphanius, he is a hostile witness. So he just lives to slander the Ebionites. He's not there to tell you how great they are or anything like that. But like I say on my channel, like all the channel art and stuff says that I'm an Ebionite. I consider myself to be an Ebionite. So don't be offended when I teach you Ebionite stuff. It's like they don't accept Paul. I don't accept Paul. So I'm not going to speak highly of Paul. I'm going to tell you all the reasons not to believe Paul, because I'm an Ebionite. I don't accept Paul, and therefore I will tell you the truth about Paul. I'm an Ebionite. I don't eat meat. Because I'm an Ebionite, I used to eat meat. The reason I stopped eating meat was because I read the sermons of Peter. I read what Peter said about it, and then I disregarded it at first. To be honest with you, it wasn't until like I was thinking along these things, and I was like, this can't be true. That we're not supposed to eat meat. I can't believe that that's the truth. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me, and it said, you sound like a Christian who doesn't want to give up his bacon. And I was like, okay, all right. God knew what to say to me to get through to me, and that got through to me. So why do I not eat meat? Because of the teachings of Peter, and because the Holy Spirit revealed to me that the teachings of Peter were true. It was not because I was already a vegetarian and I just jumped at the chance to try and impose my will on everyone else and make up some stuff saying that the Ebionites were vegetarian and all this. Like, I didn't write the Panarian. Epiphanius did. It's been around for 1,600 years. I did not write it 1,600 years ago. So, it's not my own personal vendetta, my own personal, pet doctrine or whatever. It's something that I changed the way I believed based upon the teachings that we have from Peter. And the Holy Spirit confirmed it. So that's why I don't eat meat. But don't get aggravated with me, because I'm an Ebionite and I teach you Ebionite stuff. Like if you want normal church Pauline doctrine, then go to a normal Pauline church. It won't be correct. You'll be led down the wrong path. You'll be told things that are not true. I'll tell you the truth. Like, I might be the one place that you've been to where you actually get to hear the truth. And, it's up to you to accept it. But you not accepting it doesn't make it any less true. So anyway, I pray that this has been a blessing to you. This will be part one of at least a 2-part series. So this is Ebionites 101, speaking about what we can see from Epiphanius that the Ebionites believed. I'm going to make an Ebionites 102, speaking about that's really just going to get into the whole subject of why Yeshua taught his disciples to eat a vegetarian diet. And we'll actually look at some of the proof from the Nazarene Acts and from other places and try and make a case to help you understand the origin of where it came from in Yeshua's doctrines. So thanks for listening. Shalom.